I never imagined that my life, with all its twists and turns, could lead me to what I'm about to share. My name is Jose Antonio Vieira, and I'm 72 years old. I spent most of my life as a civil police officer, a profession that shaped me in ways I only now begin to understand. I grew up in a family where faith wasn't central. My father was a Spiritist, my mother a devout Catholic, and I lived between these worlds without a clear direction. Life seemed to go on like it does for most people. One day after another, working, facing challenges, but never realizing the emptiness inside me. I wasn't a bad man, but I wasn't a good one either. I carried within me a pride and hardness that kept me from any kind of spiritual transformation. To be honest, I didn't believe such a thing was even possible. In 2018, everything changed. On the road, on a rainy day, my car was hit by a truck. The force of the impact was devastating. I remember feeling the world spinning before everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in a hospital, my body bound to a bed, and my arms completely immobilized. That bed would become my prison for months, but the worst was yet to come. Have you ever stopped to think about what happens when we're between life and death? Many say there's nothing but darkness. Others believe there's light. And me? I experienced something no movie or book could ever describe. During my time in the hospital, something supernatural happened, and that's what I want to talk to you about. But before I continue, let me ask you, have you ever felt so far away from everything, so lost, that you didn't even know where you were headed? That was my life for a long time, and now I'm here to tell you what I saw. I guarantee you, it's not easy to talk about, but if you stay with me, maybe you'll understand why I'm sharing this story. Sometimes what we see at the end can change everything. The hospital bed was my entire world. For 8 months I was confined there, unable to move, unable to escape the pain that seemed never-ending. My body was broken, but what I didn't know was that my soul was even more wounded. At night, when everything grew quiet, a sense of emptiness consumed me. I could hear the doctors whispering, "He won't make it through the night." They were ready to give up on me, but I wasn't ready to give up on myself. One night, something different happened. I felt as if I was floating. My body was still there, bound to the bed, but I wasn't. Can you imagine that? Like your soul detaches from your body and you can look down at yourself from above. It was terrifying, and I had no idea what was happening. I started hearing voices, not from the nurses or doctors, but something deeper, darker. They whispered things I couldn't fully understand, but that filled me with indescribable fear. And then I saw him, a figure standing at the door of the room. He wasn't like anyone I'd ever seen before. He wore white, but not the kind of white that brings peace. It was a cold, empty white. He stared at me, and I couldn't look away. Have you ever felt the kind of fear that makes your heart pound so hard it feels like it will burst out of your chest? That's exactly what I felt. He didn't say anything, but I knew he wasn't just an ordinary visitor. He was there for me. I began to wonder, is this it? Is this how it ends? All the things I thought were important, my job, my reputation, my pride, meant nothing in that moment. I was face to face with something I couldn't explain, something that made me question everything I thought I knew about life and death. What if suddenly you found yourself walking without knowing where you were headed? That's exactly what happened to me. While my body lay in that hospital bed, my soul seemed to be guided by that man in white. He didn't say a word, but somehow I knew I had to follow him. At first I thought I was dreaming. The ground felt solid, yet it seemed as if I were floating. The environment around me was empty, silent, but with each step we took, a growing sense of fear crept over me. What if this path had no return? What if I was being taken to a place where light could not reach? I couldn't deny the calmness of that man, but there was something unsettling about him. He wasn't like a doctor or a nurse. It was as if he knew exactly who I was, every single thing I had done, both good and bad. And yet, he didn't judge me. He simply walked alongside me. The scenery began to change. At first, there were only shadows, but now I could see the outlines of something more, Dead trees bent over as if in anguish, jagged rocks too sharp to be natural. And on the horizon, a massive warehouse loomed. Its structure was gray and endless, as if it had been built to never be fully occupied. What if this was a prison for souls with nowhere else to go? With every step, my heart grew heavier. I wanted to stop, to return to the hospital, to my bed, to the life I knew, no matter how broken it was. But my feet kept moving as if pulled by an invisible force. When we reached the door of the warehouse, the man finally moved. He placed his hand on the handle, and I felt the heat before the door even opened. It wasn't an ordinary heat. It was suffocating, piercing through my very being. What if, by crossing that door, I could never leave again? When he opened it, the stench of sulfur hit me hard. It was so overpowering I could barely breathe. Inside, the fire danced in ways I had never seen before. It didn't illuminate. On the contrary, it seemed to consume all light around it. On the ground, crouched, there was someone. I couldn't see their face, but they were curled up as if bracing for something terrible. What if that was the fate awaiting me? The man in white looked at me and pointed inside. He spoke just one word: "Enter." When he opened the door and commanded me to enter, my body froze. The heat coming from inside was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It didn't burn my skin. Instead, it seeped into my bones, draining all my energy. The smell of sulfur was so intense it made me want to vomit. I knew this wasn't just any place. It was a place where suffering had no end. The fire was everywhere, but it wasn't like the fire we know. It didn't consume. It seemed to envelop and torment. It made no sense. I stood frozen at the door, gripping the frame with my hands, trying to summon the strength to understand what was happening. "Enter," he repeated, his voice calm but chilling to my soul. I looked at him, searching for any sign of compassion in his eyes, but all I saw was an authority I couldn't defy. My heart felt like it would explode from fear. I didn't want to go in, but I knew I had no choice. I took the first step, and the heat grew even more intense. It felt as though my entire body was being crushed by an invisible force. Around me, the environment was a chaotic mix of darkness and flames. There were no screams, but the silence was even worse. It was as if the air itself was heavy with suffering. Every breath felt like a burden. And then I saw them. Inside there were more people. They were scattered, some lying on the ground, others standing, but all wore expressions of despair. They weren't screaming. It was as if they had already lost the ability to react. I wondered, is this hell? Is this where everything ends? That place seemed alive. The floor, the walls, even the air pulsed with something malevolent. My body started trembling as though I was being consumed by the energy surrounding me. Tears filled my eyes as I looked at the man in white, silently begging him to take me away from there. He turned to me, his expression calm but stern. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked, breaking the silence for the first time. I couldn't answer. My mind was consumed by memories of everything I had done in my life. The wrong choices, the pride, the selfishness. It was as if everything was laid bare before me at that moment. "I don't want to stay here," I finally managed to say, my voice trembling. He looked at me for a long moment before replying, "Then prove that you can leave." Those words etched themselves into my soul. I didn't know what he meant, but one thing was clear. That place wasn't meant for me, yet it wasn't something I could simply walk away from. Something had to change. When he said, "Prove that you can leave," my heart nearly stopped. How can you prove something when you're standing in the midst of such a devastating reality? I didn't know what to do, nor how to react. All I could feel was the crushing weight of that place, as if every sin I had ever committed was there, holding me captive. I looked around, trying to understand. The people I saw didn't seem to notice my presence. They were trapped in their own torment, motionless, as if they had already lost all hope. What had happened to them? Were they also brought here to prove something, or had they run out of chances? The man in white began walking again. He led me deeper, and I followed him because Despite all the fear I felt, he still seemed to be my only way out. As we walked, I saw scenes I will never forget. Each person seemed bound by something that symbolized their wrongdoings. A woman held burning money that disintegrated in her hands. A man was surrounded by broken bottles, unable to move. These symbols made me think of my own mistakes, the choices that had brought me here. I felt a pain in my chest. It wasn't physical, but spiritual. Something inside me was being torn apart, as if the truth about who I was were being brutally exposed. "Why me?" I asked the man in white. "Why was I brought here?" He stopped and turned to me, his expression serious but not cruel. "Because you need to understand, you need to see." I didn't fully grasp what he meant, but his voice carried a weight that pierced deep into my soul. I fell to my knees, unable to continue walking. A wave of despair overwhelmed me. Was it too late for me? Had everything I'd done in life condemned me to this place? "I don't want to stay here," I said, my voice barely audible. "I want a second chance." The man in white knelt down to my level. His eyes met mine, and I felt something different. It wasn't judgment, but a mix of sorrow and hope. "Do you think you deserve a second chance?" he asked. I didn't know how to answer. Part of me wanted to say yes, that I could be better, that there was still some good in me. But another part knew that I had made terrible choices, hurt people, and lived a life of selfishness and pride. "I don't know," I finally admitted, tears streaming down my face. "But I want to change." He was silent for a moment, as if weighing my words. Then he extended his hand to me and said, "Stand up." At that moment, something shifted inside me. I didn't know what would happen next, but I realized this was the beginning of something greater. The man in white had given me a chance, and I knew I couldn't waste it. When he extended his hand to me and told me to rise, my body, or perhaps my soul, responded before I could think. I felt a strange strength lift me, as if, for a brief moment, the weight of that place could no longer hold me down. The man in white began walking again, and I followed him, hesitant but determined to understand what all of this meant. We walked through endless corridors within that warehouse. The heat didn't subside, and the stench of sulfur still clung to the air. But now something inside me was beginning to change. Each step felt like a test, each vision a lesson. I didn't know where he was taking me, but I felt I was moving toward something decisive. Suddenly, he stopped in front of a new door. It was different from the others. Small, unassuming, but with an almost imperceptible glow that set it apart from the oppressive grayness around us. He looked at me and said, "You have to decide." I was confused. "Decide what?" "I don't understand," I replied, my voice still trembling. He didn't explain. He just stood there looking at me, waiting for me to act. It was as if that door were the final barrier, the ultimate turning point before something definitive. I took a step forward and touched the handle. As I did, a wave of memories flooded my mind. They weren't ordinary recollections. They were scenes from my life, moments I had buried, things I'd rather forget. I saw the faces of people I had hurt, the mistakes I'd made, the words I'd spoken without thinking. Each image struck my heart like a blow. That's when I realized the door wasn't just a passage. It was a reflection of who I had been. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice choked with emotion. He answered calmly, as always, "So that you understand every choice has consequences, and so that you see that even now, you can still choose." My hands trembled as they gripped the handle. I felt fear, shame, and a deep desire to change everything. What if I can't do it? What if I fail again? He placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You're not alone. You never have been." Those words pierced my soul. For a moment, the heat, the smell, the voices, all of it disappeared. All that remained was the choice before me. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. On the other side, there was no fire, no sulfur, no despair. There was light. A light that didn't seem to come from any specific source but filled everything. It was warm but didn't burn. It was bright but didn't hurt my eyes. And above all, it was welcoming. I felt a peace I had never experienced before. The man in white stood beside me in silence as I gazed at the light, feeling that, for the first time, something inside me was beginning to heal. I knew there was still much to face, but in that moment I realized I had been given a chance. As I walked through the door, I was overwhelmed by a sensation I had never experienced before. It felt as if every piece of my life was being rearranged, exposed to a light that not only illuminated, but seemed to pierce through my soul. Nothing could remain hidden. It was impossible to lie to myself because in that moment everything was laid bare. My mistakes, my failures, but also the few times I had done something right. Everything carried weight, every choice, every omission. I looked at the man in white, but he said nothing. He simply watched me, as if waiting for me to understand on my own. The light seemed to pull away the layers of pride and stubbornness I had built up over the years. And that's when I understood. My entire life I had lived only for what served me. My career as a civil police officer and later as a chief investigator had hardened my heart. I justified my harshness as a necessity of the job, but in reality it was an excuse to avoid confronting what was inside me. In the presence of that light, I felt a mixture of shame and relief. There were no more masks. I was just me. For the first time, I realized how far my life had drifted from the purpose for which I was created. My heart began to break, but not in the way I feared. It was as if that light was rebuilding something within me, something I didn't even know existed. Then the man in white spoke. His voice was calm, but it carried an authority I could not ignore. "You still have a choice," he said. "You can carry the weight of all this alone, or you can give it to the one who can bear it for you." I knew what he was talking about. I had heard about Jesus many times, but I had always kept my heart closed. I told myself I was doing enough by going to church and preaching occasionally, but I had never truly given everything to him. My life was always divided, one foot in the church and the other in the world. But now there were no more excuses. "I want to change," I managed to say, tears in my eyes. "But I don't know if I'm strong enough." He placed his hand on my shoulder again and replied, "You don't have to be." He is. It was then that the light began to envelop everything around me. It was no longer just something I could see, I could feel it. It was as if I were being washed, purified of everything that had held me back. In that moment, I realized that the choice to change wasn't something I could do alone. It was an act of surrender, a plea for help. As the light began to envelop me, something profound happened. It wasn't just the gentle warmth or the peace it brought. It was as if, for the first time, I could feel that I wasn't alone. The weight I had carried for so long began to dissolve. Not all at once, but like a river slowly washing the dirt off stones. The man in white was still beside me, silent but present. I knew he was there to guide me, but the journey now seemed to be mine. With each piece of that weight lifting away, memories started to resurface. The harsh words I had spoken to those I loved, the times I chose anger over forgiveness, the moments I ignored opportunities to do good. It was as if all those things were being brought to the surface so I could finally face them. I didn't understand how, but that place of darkness and fire now felt distant. Something was changing, not just around me, but within me. The light didn't erase my past, it illuminated it, showing me where I had failed, but also where hope still remained. "You still have a purpose," said the man in white, finally breaking the silence. "But purpose isn't something you find alone. It's something you accept." Those words echoed within me. I had never thought of it that way before. I had spent my life trying to control everything, believing that strength and determination were enough. But there, in that moment, I realized control was an illusion. All I needed to do was accept the truth that had always been before me. "I want that chance," I responded. My voice was steady, but my heart still trembled. "I want to live differently. I want to be a better man." The man nodded. His expression was approving but also expectant. "This choice is the beginning, but the path will be long," he said. "You'll need to remember this moment every time you feel like giving up." With those words, the light around me began to fade. Not because it was leaving, but because something within me now carried it. I felt a newfound strength, something that didn't come from me but was greater than anything I could understand. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the hospital. The heat, the smell of sulfur, the despair, everything was gone. Instead, I felt a peace I had never experienced before. My wife was by my side, crying tears of relief, and the doctors rushed in, astonished to see me conscious. I knew my life would never be the same. That second chance wasn't just a gift, it was a calling, and I could no longer ignore it. After weeks in the hospital, I was discharged. My body still bore the scars of the accident, but my soul was transformed. Every step I took, even with difficulty, was a reminder that I had been given something precious, a second chance. And this chance wasn't just for me, it was meant to be shared, to warn and to inspire others. Returning home felt strange at first. The world around me seemed the same, but I was no longer the same person. The things that used to concern me, status, power, control, had lost their appeal. My family noticed the difference. My wife said, "You seem lighter, as if you've let go of a huge burden." And she was right. The experience in the hospital had shown me what truly matters. I started sharing my testimony, first with close friends, then in churches. At first, I was afraid I wouldn't be understood, but something incredible happened each time I spoke. People cried, they were moved, and some said, "This touched my life in ways I never expected." It was as if my story wasn't just mine. It had the power to reach other souls. One day, as I shared my experience in a small church, a young woman approached me. Her eyes were filled with tears. She said, "I feel like my life is heading in the same direction yours was before the accident. How can I change?" I looked at her, and the words came naturally. Repent. Surrender your life to Jesus right now. He's not far away. He's knocking on the door of your heart, waiting for you to let him in. That night was special, not just for her, but for me too. Every person who connected with my story reinforced the certainty within me that God had spared my life for a reason. My purpose was now clear: to use my life as a living testimony of what grace and mercy can do. Today, as you read or listen to my story, I want to say something directly to you. It's not a coincidence that you've made it this far. I believe God is speaking to you just as He spoke to me in that hospital. Maybe you feel trapped, carrying a burden that seems impossible to let go. Or perhaps you're living as I was, with one foot in the church and the other in the world. But know this: there's still time. There's still a choice. If you feel in your heart that you need a transformation, I want to pray for you right now. Leave a simple comment, something like, "I choose to live with God," and I will pray, asking God to touch your life just as He touched mine, because He is still at the door, waiting for you to let Him in. I was rescued to tell what I saw and felt. Now it's up to you to take the next step. God is calling. Are you ready to answer?